So we're going to be focusing today on what often get called the soft skills. So if you think, how many of you have gone through anything like the IISP membership? Show of hands. The NCSC, CCP, whatever acronym it is at the moment. Yeah. So you'll all have had to fill in that skills framework thing. And so you'll know that a lot of the stuff that's focused in on is the operational element of, can you prove that you're professionally capable and technically capable of doing your job? And then right at the end are these things called the J skills, the soft skills. So do you have the ability to operate in a leadership and communications role? And that's the bit we're going to focus on today. Primarily because in my experience, that's the area that actually as information security professionals, we often don't focus enough on. We spend a lot of time going on training courses to improve our technical capability, but how many people have been on a leadership and development course in the last 3 years? Yeah, relatively small number of people in the room. Okay, so I hope you will enjoy this. Please feel free to interact with us as we go along. The next hour flies by if you interact with us. Otherwise, it's just an hour of you sitting there looking at us blank-faced, and we get a little bit unsure as to whether we're even speaking the same language as the people in the room. So please interact with us. Okay, so I want to start by asking you a couple of key questions when it comes to the J skills. And please feel free to sort of make some notes now that you can then reflect back on after we've gone through some of the content. And I wonder, how effective do you think your current board and business communications are? When you're talking to people in senior leadership roles and when you're talking to your business as a whole, how effective would you say those communications are? Does the business get the outcomes it needs from your communications? Do your communications ultimately facilitate your organization's business objectives? Does your board get the insight that they need as a result of your communication with them? So how effective do you think your communications overall are? Does the business get what it needs as a result of those communications? And is your board left with genuine insight as a result of those communications? And communications can be verbal, or it can be, sending reports, it can be having regular meetings, in whatever way you have contact with your board. And then I just want you to reflect on the answers that you've come up with to those questions as we go through this masterclass. And finally, ask yourself, how do you know? How do you know how effective you are? How do you know your business is getting what it needs? And how do you know that your board has been left with insight? Okay.
Peter Drucker is widely acknowledged as being the godfather of modern management. I'm not sure if they mean by godfather that if you get it wrong he takes you out in a boat and shoots you, or whether it means that he was just very, very good. I'm going to take it that he was very, very good. In other words, what you do is what becomes your policy. So you can set lots of policies, but what people actually do, how they behave, how they communicate is a big part of that, will dictate what the culture of your business is. So if your culture is one of missed communication opportunities or poor communication, then lots of opportunities will be lost, and that will actually become your culture. So one of the questions really is, why do we need to change communication behaviour? Well, there are lots of reasons why we need to change communication behaviour, and I'm going to come on to a couple of them now. All right, which button? That one. Thank you. So last year I did a workshop at CSP, which was talking with an awful lot of information security professionals about current challenges, things that are happening in their businesses, the situations that they found themselves in. It was a very broad-ranging conversation, but one of the things that came back very clearly was a feeling of being misunderstood, being under-resourced, being under lots of additional pressure and the scope of their roles constantly changing with not enough resource. The key from all of that was that they were misunderstood, I felt. So that comes through in an awful lot of different ways, and not necessarily just in how much resource or budget they're allocated, but the attitude towards them, how supported and understood they are in the business, and how much support they are getting back from the business. And I don't just mean leadership, I mean the whole business. So what I thought might be interesting is to try and put some shape around that so that it makes some sense to you. So I thought it might be interesting to imagine some of the conversations that might come from these particular groups of people. So if you're dealing with the boardroom, you might find yourself up against people who are saying things like, can you just get to the point? Can you make this quicker? Can you make it simpler? Or they're just staring at you as if they have not got a clue what it is that you're talking about. They want to know, all right, okay, that's fine, you're very clever. What do I need to know? What do I need to know now? What do I need to know for next week? And what do I need to know going forward? So what they're asking you for is not lots and lots of detail. What they're asking for is insight, which is not the same as information, and it's definitely not the same as data. What do you want me to do? All right, you're telling me all this stuff. What do you want me to do about it? You're telling me all this information. You've given me all these reports. You've given me all these outputs. What do you want me to do about it? I don't know. I don't understand what it is that you've given me. And actually, I'm not going to say this to you, but you're making me feel really stupid. If you find yourself in that situation where you're with a leader, a business leader or a unit leader who's been made to feel stupid, the outcome of that interaction is not going to be good. It's never going to be positive. As another business service provider, I can tell you the more clever that you can make that person feel, the more intelligent, the more connected, the more well-informed you can make them feel, that's where the good outcomes come from. So then we've got users thinking, oh, making me feel stupid. I'm not stupid. Don't call me stupid. I'm not a stupid user. I just don't understand. Why does security seem to go out of its way to make my job harder? I've got all these processes I have to go through, all these policies. I'm up to here with policies. I can't get to what it is that I need to get to. I can't share what it is that I want to share. Why are you always saying no to my projects? I've got all these great ideas.
I'll just challenge that. Security generally doesn't say no to projects.
It's a generalisation. So there might not in your organisation.
I've never worked anywhere where that's been a thing, and it seems to be a myth that keeps being perpetuated. Security asks lots of awkward questions, which they may not be able to answer.
This is from the user's perspective. It's not from security's perspective. It's from the user's perspective.
Talking to our users, because that's what I do. I do information security. It's my job. So part of that is talking to our user base and making sure they understand. And my job is to ensure that security is part and parcel of what they do, not something else.
Which it is, yes.
Never be an extra thing. They should never feel they're being told no. They should always.
I agree with you.
And that's great. You obviously work for organisations that get this. I can say, as an information security professional of 30 years, I've worked for plenty of companies where I've gone in after other security people and found a massive entrenched culture of no. I've worked with organisations in the private and public sector where there has been a mentality of security says no, security is a blocker, where security is often not engaged at the start of a project, but is the people who come in at the end of a project and are then seen as the troublemakers. It's great that you haven't come across that. All I'm saying is, generally, there's a huge number of users out there who do think this.
Then you need to be looking at what are the processes rather than it being security.
And that's really what this workshop is talking about today.
So
We're not.
The organisation I'm in, it's very much, we've had it over the years, we've grown up that safety has to be embedded into the process. The users, the projects get that. The challenge for us is how do you get security taken in the same way, not as an add-on or
Absolutely.
party.
that's it.
Absolutely.
Always the last one to the party. So from a security perspective, this is what we hear more often than not. As what we hear from users is this. So It's great if that's not your experience, but it certainly is ours.
It's not just security, it's the organisation I work in. You have people running projects, they've brought ideas, and once they happen more funding, they come to through no business case process, they go any department's process, and then they come to follow us. We want to go live with this thing, but we haven't got the funding to purchase, we're doing it anyway.
Yeah, and I've worked on I've been brought into projects in the last sort of quarter of a project where we've then started talking about the funding for the security, for the ongoing IT health checks, for ongoing management as part of business as usual, and people just throwing their hands up and gone, well, nobody told us it was going to cost that much, because security isn't an embedded part of the project management life cycle. And in many organisations I've worked with, and it is really great that you've not had this experience, but how many people in this room have never, ever come across a situation where they've come across an organisation that's had a culture of security says no?
I don't think so much it's security says no. It's things like, where are they going to get the money from for the pen testing that's going to need to take place and these things, and it's not in their budgets.
And I'm not saying the security people are saying no. What I'm saying is the perception from the end user is that's what the security people will say, because that's been their experience. Because of the way the lack of communication or the disjointed communication, it's not saying security people are out there to say no, it's saying the end user's perception is that security is difficult, it gets in the way, and security people often say no. But often what security people are saying is, hang on a second, it's a great idea, but what we really need to be doing is thinking about this properly, end to end, and how that's going to be done safely and securely. Except a lot of security people don't say that. What they say is, risk, security, governance. Without the appropriate security. In your organisation, I can guarantee, I was with an organisation only a couple of months ago where their outgoing security person for 5 years had ruled the roost and categorically had the authority to say no. And you stopped so many good projects as a result of that. Yes, I agree. Thank you.
Well, that's one of the reasons why we're here.
I'll tell you what, if you let us run the masterclass and we'll try and answer that question, what do you do about it?
To talk about some
I was asking what this lady does herself when she's finding things like that. I argue, that's all I can do.
Okay.
Okay, so one of the reasons for this slide then is to look at the different perceptions and attitudes of these three groups of people, because they all rub up against each other at some point with varying degrees of success, as we've established. Some of them will bring great outcomes, some of them will bring mediocre outcomes, some of them will bring genuinely terrible outcomes. So what we're trying to do is to just get underneath the skin of these three groups in a very broad way in order to try and classify that kind of response, because they've all got different priorities, they all want different things out of the interactions, and they're not necessarily the same thing. So the part where we just left was I'm always the last person to the party. This is something that we hear very strongly from security people, that, as Mike was just explaining, very frequently they're brought in at the last point of a project. And, you know, there may be dwindling amounts of budget, there may be dwindling amounts of understanding, there may be dwindling amounts of patience, particularly if you're dealing with these sorts of people in the red over here. And in the meantime, you've got this poor security person wondering why the board doesn't want to interact with them. So this is a key point for us, and also users, this is a key point for us. But the situation that we're in terms of information security is that we've got a skills gap at the moment, and we've got a growing business need for information security professionals and really robust information security teams. We cannot really afford to be having our security teams running around dealing with absolutely everything, because they're facing an unprecedented threat landscape at the moment. So the more that we can get our boards on board in dealing with our information security, and the more that we can spread the message and the lexicon of security throughout an organisation, the better response that we're going to get, because we're all going to be speaking the same language, we're all going to understand what threats and risks that we're trying to deal with, and we're all going to understand the part that each of us individually plays in mitigating that risk. But unless we can communicate effectively to both of these groups of people, then it's not going to happen. There's a whole range of things that occurred to me when we started this process, when we started looking at writing this masterclass. One of the things that occurred to me was, again, to go back to the results that I had from CSP York and listening to some of the things that I was told there. I've been working in communications for a very long time, but this is an industry that I've never experienced quite so much of something called imposter syndrome. Such an incredibly talented, intelligent group of people working in information security, just remarkable, absolutely remarkable. But I've never met so many people who genuinely felt that they weren't good enough, or that they were, I'm not uncomfortable having this conversation, or, oh God, please don't ask me, or, oh, they've invited me to the boardroom, I don't know what I'm going to say. Yeah, there's all this stuff that I want, there's all these projects that I need to do, there's all this funding that I'm looking for, but genuinely feeling really uncomfortable about having to do it. It's unprecedented. I've never experienced anything like it. It's not one of the only communication barriers, but it's one that I felt was important enough. Having the amount of people that I've encountered talk about it, I felt that it was something worth bringing up today. Now, it presents in very different ways. So how it feels to the person who is experiencing this, to how it feels to the person who is experiencing the results of that in their communication will be very, very different. The way I've experienced it has been a need to prove that you know what you're talking about, in a way that, the finance director doesn't feel that they need to do that, or the HR director doesn't feel that they need to do that. They'll just come along and say whatever it is that they've got to say. A need to show an expansive knowledge so that someone's going to trust. And that means sometimes giving a little too much detail. If you remember the previous slide, if you're dealing with a board director or a business leader, they want you to be brief, be bright, and be gone. So if you're standing there giving them chapter and verse and a lead up and a shaggy dog story as to why it is you need an extra 50k or whatever it might be, it's just not going to go across. This, I fear that they may look down on me, and I was a hobbyist practitioner, are two of the most prevalent attitudes that I've come across. And I think the professionalisation of the information security industry is really going to help with that. Because if you're dealing with effectively your peer in an organisation, there's no reason why anybody should feel in any way lesser to the person that they're talking to. But having come through a different route that maybe had a different attitude towards professionalisation, or you were a hobbyist practitioner, may affect how you feel about yourself and may affect how you feel in that particular interaction. So I'm not saying this is the case for everyone, but it certainly seems to have affected quite a few people that I've spoken to.
Do you think that starts, though, all the way from the job advert that's advertised? If you look at most modern job adverts, they want everything under the sun.
Oh, yeah.
What we need to know and the skill sets we have is ever-changing. You said about accounting.
Yeah.
Roles and responsibilities don't really change as they progress through their career. And they might go into management, but there's still an accountant at heart.
Yes, but the change that's happening in information security is constant. Absolutely. I've got some stuff to say on that in just a second. It's a really good point. And if I don't answer it, then we'll come back and we'll talk about it. So this is what may be happening if you're feeling imposter syndrome. This is what's happening to the board director who's looking at your output that you've bought in order to try and get some kind of response. And they're thinking, oh no, what is this now? What's he or she bringing me? I don't understand this. This makes me feel so stupid every time I have to interact with this person. I'm always left feeling completely baffled. And it's got nothing to do with good communication. It's got nothing to do with what you're trying to communicate either. But if you find yourself in this situation trying to back away or get away from someone constantly, it's probably because they're not understanding what it is that they're being communicated at. But unfortunately, that's the bit that's going to set the business culture. It's also the bit where the money comes from. So, you could sum it up as working in security or working in security. So why does any of that matter? I mean, okay, that's all nice to know, and yes, there are a variety of reasons why we might struggle with communication, and there are a variety of reasons why the back and forth might be established, and why sometimes that plank of empathy that we need in order to progress on can be a little bit more like a walking the plank on a pirate ship than it is on actually creating empathy between groups of people. But it's really important that we get to the bottom of why we need to do this. Why do we need a cultural change? So I looked at some research that was done for Bay Dynamics, and it was done by Osterman Research. And if this set of figures doesn't explain why we need to change, then I don't know what does. So board members are saying that they need improved reporting. They haven't quantified what they mean by improved reporting, but they've said that they need improved reporting. Maybe this goes some way to explaining what they mean, which is they feel like they don't want to have to be cyber experts or information security experts in order to understand what it is that you're communicating to them. In other words, they need you to boil down whatever the point is that you're trying to say and give them a piece of insight. So we know that information security people want that, and we know that board members want that. So there is a coming together of thought. You know, people are in agreement with one another. It's just actually making that happen. This is a big one. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier about the kind of information, the format that it is in, the way it is presented. This just doesn't apply to boards, actually. This applies to everyone. Because if you're trying to create or support a training program within your organisation, which is obviously really important if you're going to embed security into everyone's behaviour, if you're presenting data that is not understood, or perhaps there isn't a reason for it, if there isn't a reason for presenting a particular figure or statistic, then maybe you shouldn't do it. There's all sorts of things to consider. But if you've got more than half of boards saying that they've been presented with information that's too technical, they're not going to make a decision on it, they're not going to value what it is that they are being told, and risk is not going to be reduced as a result of that interaction. And if risk is not reduced as a result of that interaction, then what was the point of the interaction? Yes?
Is there any research to say whether or not the board are actually talking to the people lower down and explaining, I don't want this, it's too technical, can you give it to me like this? Because if you're not told, you don't know that you're giving them the wrong thing.
At the moment, as far as Osterman have got with their research, is that they're both saying the same things, and they're saying it to everybody else, but they're not saying it to each other yet.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is why I highlighted that part, because obviously they are both saying the same things. It was two separate sets of research. It was that complemented each other, and I've put them together here to show that actually everyone is saying the same thing. They just haven't got to the point of going, and I need to say that to you.
Yeah. So you had a question there.
Back in 2013, saying that the board don't want facts and figures. You need to have them in case they ask, but you want to tell them the story. You want to tell them the rest of your narrative about why you need to do a project. They don't want to hear facts and figures. And in practice, it's actually true. You can go to your chief exec and say, this is the position where we need to do this. Tell them, think like a narrative, without presenting loads and loads of facts and figures. And I think the problem is that wherever people in security, it needs to be management that oversees stuff that don't understand this and insist on generating swathes and swathes of statistical data that the board don't want to see.
Yeah.
No, they definitely don't want to see it. Storytelling is a major tool for every other business unit in business, and that's something that, you know, all of the departments basically do in their communications, both with each other but also to the board as well. So yes, you need to know your stuff, but you don't need to give. You need to know chapter and verse, but you don't need to communicate chapter and verse. You need to have it there in case someone says, well, yeah, okay, but why? Or can you expand on this part? Or can you explain that bit? Or can we do a deep dive on this area? They're leaders. They have to be trusted to know what it is that's important, because they're setting not only the culture, but they're setting the business strategy. So we're part of that strategy, and if we can't communicate to them in a way that they need to be communicated to, i.e. with a story, with a narrative, with a beginning, middle and end, and with the outcome in sight, and the outcome is in sight and aligned with the business strategy as well, that's the piece that we're missing. So in terms of repercussions then for the information security professionals, there is in fact another elephant in the room as far as I'm concerned here, which is the skills gap. Because if this is true, and boards are actually saying, well, we'll just fire them. If they don't communicate the way we need them to, then we'll just fire them, or we give them a warning, or whatever it might be. But this is this is really, really serious, because this shows not only a disconnect between information security, the business and the board, but it shows a disconnection with reality as well, which is quite unnerving. And if as part of that communication, boards are not understanding the current landscape, then that's doubly frightening. So I had a quick look at the information security workforce study. So they've now rebranded, but as when it was published, this is what it was called. And because I wanted to look at, is there a relationship between what businesses think they want and what information security people think they want, and also what they want out of their careers? And what I discovered was we've got a real disconnection there as well. So actually businesses are saying, we prize communication very, very highly. Yes, of course we want very developed analytical skills. Of course we need that. But we're in a dynamic situation. We've got a very dynamic threat landscape. We need to have this communicated to us. We need people who can communicate to us. Now, there's another way around that, because you won't necessarily find highly developed analytical skills and communication skills in the same person. It doesn't always happen. Some of it you can learn, of course. You can do courses, you can learn how to do it. And there are lots of hints and tips and tricks that I've got a handout for you that will help you today. However, if that's still a struggle, or it is still something that is very hard to overcome for you, then there are other things that you can be doing. But we have to get past this. We have to get past this communication block, because it's being acknowledged not only by boards in research, it's being acknowledged by information security people as well. But the challenge is they're not saying it to each other yet.
But I see two different things there. One, I've got a lot of my staff who like badge collecting, because
Yes.
or whatever, because they think that's the skills they want.
Yes.
But actually, I need to drive them to that.
Yes.
But then when we see adverts that are coming out, oh, I want someone who's going to be a board advisor, but you must be an ethical hacker, you must be CISP, you must be this, that, and the other. Whoa, hang on a minute, you don't even know what you want.
Part of the challenge.
Swiss Army
Yeah.
penknife infosec person. Yeah.
And I think that's part of the challenge that we have as a community, is at the moment, the only way to prove that you're a professional is to have a number of those badges. Obviously, the stuff that's happening in the future, the move towards further professionalisation and charter status and things like that is going to help us in that area. But there are so many qualifications. You could spend the rest of your life doing boot camps and picking up badges and still end up with more to do. And it's such a fragmented profession.
There's no point knowing all the information if you can't articulate that to the business.
Absolutely.
To understand and to see the work.
Yeah. But
So-
it's also, and picking up on your thing about the job hires, one of the things that we see a lot is it depends on the organisation. You know, I've gone into organisations where their information security person is basically the grade of an admin assistant, and that's how much credence they give to that person, and that's how much influence that person therefore has. And I've gone into other places where they're taken very seriously, and they're a trusted member and a trusted advisor to the board. And we've got organisations that are all over the place.
And everything in between.
Do you find that because people that take them more seriously are recovering from an incident more so? So once bitten, twice shy, or is it just a...
Sometimes, but not necessarily. Sometimes there are organisations who work in a strong compliance, but have also understood that it's good for their business. There are organisations who go through certifications and as a result that see benefits and embrace it. And there are organisations who have a very strong culture, but it's being driven from external factors because through the supply chain. So there's a whole range of factors out there.
Okay, so I'm going to hand back to Mike now.
So just going back to the J skills then, and the questions I asked at the start of the session, I'm rethinking that. Do I need to tailor my communications to the people I'm talking to? Do I need to be thinking that, well, okay, if that's middle management and they want the stats, that's great, but I'm also going to need to produce a version of that that is suitable for the board, and not trust that that will then happen. So I give all the stats to the person who wants it because they want it to commission the project, but I'm also going to still need to produce communication for the board because I can't trust this person to take those stats and turn that back into the plain language. Or maybe I need to be thinking about the language I'm having when I'm communicating down into the business, and how do I do that in a way that is going to be emotively connected to by the right people. Are there untapped resources at my disposal to enable this to happen? Do we work with people like communication specialists and HR? Do we work with health and safety professionals and collaborate with them and learn from them? Health and safety have put a huge amount of work into things like near-miss reporting over the years. And many organisations from a security perspective are still not publishing near misses. And yet we know culturally near-miss reporting can be an invaluable tool that keeps us safe. Can I improve the relationship between business and security? Because that should be a prime goal of ours, is to make sure the relationship is healthy, that we are trusted, that we are the first point of call for people to come to and ask for help. And, as a result of that, those of you that have gone through CCP, can I improve my gradings by becoming better at these skills, by putting effort into these skills? And the research that was done into some of the top leaders in the world showed a number of things. First, they were not natural charismatic leaders. It was learned behaviour. And secondly, they demonstrated consistency. And they demonstrated situational consistency. And situational consistency means being able to flex your communication and leadership style to be appropriate to the situation and the level of maturity of the people you're dealing with. So one size when it comes to comms doesn't always fit. So we're just running short of time here a little bit, and we've got a stand over on in the exhibition hall here. If any of you would like to come and we were going to have a discussion at this point, but actually, to be fair, the discussion has been happening all the way through this, which has been great and very healthy. But I just want to finish by thinking that these are some of the J skills that I've picked out, and this comes from the NCSC CCP, so I recognise they're slightly different to the IISP ones now, but the key messagings are the same really. So we need to be thinking about how do we lead within our business? Do we demonstrate leadership capability and skills, and taking responsibility for conveying bad or unwelcome news diplomatically? And how do we do that in a way that is welcomed by the board? Nobody likes to hear bad news, but sometimes they have to hear it. But also when we're communicating to the board, are we communicating to them in a way that is understood, that is taken on board, and that encourages a decision from them? Or have we told them what they have to do? Do we ask the board for decision as a result of our insight, or do we tell them, you're going to have to do this? Because they're two totally different conversations. Ensuring the organisation builds on and uses the strength of the individuals within it, working collaboratively across all of those silos in your business, and using people from across the business to help you to further your aim. Far too often I see security wrapped up under an IT security policy, when actually that needs to be a business policy. But also think about your policies and how intuitive are they? And are we still using rule-based policies, or are we setting out the principles that along with education can lead people to make the right decision for themselves? I don't know if you've done leadership and development, if you've ever worked with the matrix that talks about high challenge and high support. And what we want is everybody in our organisation to be in a situation where they're highly challenged to think for themselves and make the right decision with the right level of high support. And that gives us good quality outcomes. Too much challenge and not enough support leads to stress and they switch off. Too much support and not enough challenge leads to apathy, and they become dependent. And in some organisations I've worked with, that's what happens. The organisation has become dependent on the security person to make their decisions for them. And finally, providing that technical leadership in your professional field within your organisation, but then being able to present that effectively to a wide range of audiences in a way that is fully understood, and being able to check and measure the level of understanding that comes as a result of that. Situational consistency, high challenge, high support, and most of all, never losing sight of the individuals themselves, which means maintaining positive regard, always talking to people with respect, no matter how much they infuriate you, no matter how much you think they've done it to you on purpose. No, never ever lose positive regard with them. Most importantly of all is the ability to be able to interact with people and understand, was their behaviour as a result of won't, or was it actually a behaviour of can't, because they haven't had the right leadership, the right communication, being given the right tools, or in some cases, have we done something in our processes that has led them to do the wrong thing? And believe it or not, I was with a government organisation only 2 weeks ago, and what they've just admitted to me is their policy forces their users to break the rules in order to do the right thing, and then they get punished for it. Is it any wonder that in some organisations security are not just not respected, but actually actively avoided? What does good look like for your organisation, for your culture, for your core values? And that's what we need to be getting to, is can we deliver security in line with our core values and our operational objectives in a way that gets everybody involved and being part of the solution, using the right principles communicated effectively so that they do the right thing because they want to.
So one of the things that we were trying to suggest, if you could click again please, Mike, is using the language of security and risk to move between, I've just picked out a few example business units here, but what we're effectively trying to do is to use our communications people to help with building information security language, very much like what the lady over there was talking about earlier, so that everyone feels like they're part of the solution. Because as soon as that language starts to enter everyone's lexicon, then everyone is communicating not only to each other, but their board communications will also include that lexicon as well. So that's, for me, that's what good looks like, because everyone is using the same language, they're using it appropriately, they're using it with one another, and they're using it in their communications back to leadership as well. And leadership will be using it back to them too. At that point, that's where we have reached what good looks like, using communication and leadership skills.
And I just want to finish this, I just want to read you a quote which I think summarises everything that we're talking about here today. And it's by Charles Handy. The softer words of leadership and vision and common purpose will replace the tougher words of control and authority, because the tough words won't bite anymore. Communicating to a board in a positive way that shows that security is a business enabler and will help the business to be more effective, more prosperous, more competitive. Whatever it is your business wants to do will be far more effective than telling them they've got to do it because of a £22 million fine or whatever. The carrot will always be more effective than the stick.
I've got some hints and tips at the front here for anybody who'd like to take a copy. If there's more people here actually than I was expecting, so if you want to put your email address, if you trust me enough to give me your email address, I promise I won't send you anything else. I'll send you a PDF of it. Okay, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.